Joining us from Vancouver, Joni Brennan, President of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join this very important event.
So since I'm not seeing you, but I'm hearing you pretty well, I will leave you the floor and the microphone.
Perfect. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to join this important event, as I said, and certainly a joy to watch the Jeopardy game previous. Lots to learn there. As mentioned, I'm Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. I am joining you from Vancouver, where I hear we both have rain in Vancouver and in Quebec today. So with that, let us get started. And part of the reason I'm presenting remotely is due to the requirements of the COVID-19, which we're still working through. And we've done some research with the DIAC, where we've focused on digital identity and specifically what effect COVID-19 has had on Canadian perceptions and demand regarding digital identity. So first, a little bit about who we are. We are the DIAC. We are an adoption accelerator. So we are an organization that works to bring perspective to digital identity and helps to inform strategies and tactics and investments around the space. We've been in operation for 10 years now, which we're very proud of. And we are Canada's most diverse voice, representing different provinces, territories, and populations on the topics. DIAC is also what we call a trust framework provider. And the notion of a trust framework provider is an organization that creates a framework and is responsible for the management of that framework and a certification or verification program that will go along with that information assurance or that trust framework. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. We are a nonprofit organization with about over 110 members from across Canada, and we're really proud of the diversity that we have to offer. Now, let's talk about what Canadians think regarding digital identity. We've done 2 years of studies, 2019 and 2020, and we're just in the process of doing our 2021 review. So we have a longitudinal study where we're learning over time how perceptions are staying the same and how they're changing with regard to digital identity. And so first, when we asked Canadians about their confidence in digital identity, we actually saw that there was an increased willingness between 2019 and 2020 for Canadians to share information, provided that they knew that there was going to be some kind of convenience that would go along with that information sharing. They were actually a little bit less concerned about information being compromised. So here we can see a breakdown of the 2019 results, the 2020 results, and also a little bit of the demographics of how the types of people that were answering the questions. We also saw a significant increase in the population desire to learn more about digital identity and the benefits and capabilities that it has to offer. So we saw a raise in about 6% there in people's willingness and desire to learn about these topics and what they have to offer society. And when it comes to COVID-19, a large percent, 3/4 or 75%, believe that digital identity, that the COVID-19 pandemic, social distancing, work from home, all of these challenges really makes the need for digital identity even more urgent and more important to respondents of the survey. I'll also note the survey is coast to coast to coast, and so we have lots of diversity in the respondents. So big number there. COVID-19 is a big driver for the demand for digital identity, for that convenience, for security, as we have needed going through this crisis. Now, I found this stat to be very interesting. When we took the time through the survey to explain to respondents that if we were to move you who feel capable of using digital services, if we're moving the population that feels most capable and most confident as long as that means that the population that needs the telephone and the population that needs the office visit, that they can get better service, well, we actually found that 9 in 10 or 88% of Canadians who were responding were very, very interested to move over. And so what this says is that there's a real giving spirit. There's a spirit of caring for others. And so as long as we know that people who need the added services through the phone in the office, they'll get it, then people were even more willing to move to digital. So I think that's an important feature that says that we can take a stepwise approach as we move forward on the path to digital, not digital only, but moving the crowd that's ready for digital first. Now, a key specific subgroup and differentiator, I don't know that there's a term for this in French. In English, we call it the sandwich generation. I think in French, it would be more like the caregiver generation. And so the generation who was most interested to learn more and feels the pressure of the need for digital identity are the people who are caring for children or dependents in the household. And they also may be caring for an aging relative, an aging friend, a parent who's in the household. And so we call this the sandwich generation. They're caring for people in both generations on each side of them. And so we can see that the most pressure is felt here. And so when we compare the blue are the caregiver generation and the light blue below, that's the to the norm, to the basics. And so we can see much greater interest from the caregiver generation to adopting digital identity and to adopting digital solutions in the time of the pandemic. Now, we also asked in terms of some key subgroups, people who identified themselves as having a disability or a handicap. This group actually did have a little bit more concern about sharing of information and that they would be appropriately protected for that information sharing. And so as we can see, the perspectives regarding digital identity are just as diverse as the people who digital identity will ultimately help with the right rules and tools in place, of course. Now, of those surveyed, a large number, 4 in 5 of those who were asked felt that it was very important that governments move quickly to put a form of digital identity in place and to enable a trusted digital identity approach for all Canadians. And so that's 82% responding that they wanted to see governments move forward, issuing credentials like digital driver's license or other credentials, for, passport, for example, really a desire here for governments to move forward, and it was roughly the same whether we were asking this in the text of the government of a provincial government, a territorial government, or also a federal government. Big desire for governments to step in and play an important role here. Now, in terms of we asked Canadians, how would they like to see a digital identity framework move forward? And so who should be setting the rules and the tools, and what should be the best path forward in terms of how the ecosystem of solutions and services are governed and how it's maintained going forward? And so when the question was asked, it was asked if the public sector should take a lead, should the private sector take a lead, or should it be a mix of both? And we can see that in our 2020 response, 66% felt that a public and private approach to addressing the needs for digital identity would be the best way forward. Respondents indicated that by the public sector and the private sector working together, they really felt the most sense of comfort. They felt that each group could provide the checks and balances to ensure that digital identity met all the needs, whether we're looking at government service delivery or whether we're talking about buying that purchase online and having confidence that we'll get what we were looking for and we're transacting with the right business. So overwhelmingly, a public and private collaboration is what respondents were looking for. It was an equal split. 17% 17% felt really government should go it alone in this space, that it should be solely led and governed by governments. And the equal split, 17% felt that this should be solely managed and solely driven forward by the private sector. And so this is good news, as in fact, across Canada, we do see public-private collaboration. We see that in our organization, and we see that in other examples that are happening across Canada. And this public and private collaborative approach is also one of the reasons many economies and stakeholders from around the world are actually looking at the path forward that Canada and our provinces and our economy is taking to address these issues. Now, of top importance and priority is how do we ensure that citizens are protected and are respected as a digital identity ecosystem moves forward. Digital identity has to be here to solve the people and to give the best benefit to the people. And so we need the right building blocks or the right elements in place to ensure that there is respect in this ecosystem. And so let's start from the idea from the previous slide that a public and private sector collaborative approach is preferred. Let's look at some of the necessities, some of the problems that do need to be addressed and resolved as we move forward in this space. And so these are some common challenges around digital identity and the different solutions that we're seeing going forward. And the first common area that needs to be addressed is creating the right market conditions to enable the marketplace to move forward. And so in creating those market conditions, we do need to pay attention to and contribute to the development of standards. Now, there certainly are standards that are developing, technology standards that are developing with industry bodies. There are standards that are developing with national bodies and standards that are developing in international bodies. So this is good news from a standards perspective, but it also creates challenge because there is not necessarily a clear adoption or a singular way forward from a standards perspective. So standards are an important piece of how we move forward. Now, regulation, of course, plays an important piece in terms of creating the right market conditions. Certainly in Quebec, there's been a lot of movement on Bill 95 and Bill 64 to creating that regulatory framework. From a federal perspective, we did see Bill C-11 introduced in years previous, and we think that we'll see more movement around a federal regulatory framework. And from a DIAC, from our organizational perspective, we hope that we see personal data empowerment, and particularly data that is issued and held by the public sector, like our passports or our verified income from the CRA or our driver's license. We hope we see more empowerment and expectation about how we can use those data the way that we may choose to out in our lives. Now, the second grouping of issues that need to be resolved to help to move this space forward in a respectful way is to support sustainability and growth of the marketplace. And now, what does this mean? It means sustainability, ensuring that when we're looking at digital identity solutions or networks, we need to look at what are the business models that are supporting these types of solutions. Is this a commercial solution, or is this something that is going to be taxpayer funded, for example? Now, there are many different types of solutions, and there are just as many types of sustainability models. So we ask people today, when you look at digital identity, look at the sustainability for what's being proposed, and that will tell you a little bit more about if it's a solution that you want to adopt or you want to trust and have confidence in. And then secondly, and most importantly, the last note here is inclusion. And so as we look at different digital identity solutions or networks for information sharing for digital identity, we must ensure that they are inclusive and equitable and that everyone has a chance to participate in them. And we're not leaving anyone behind, or we're not creating even more gap to some of the gaps that exist today. So we must look at inclusion. So these are some areas when you're looking at digital identity and need to make decisions. Look at the standard space, look at the regulations, look at sustainability models, and look at inclusion, and that will help you along with your decision making. Now, digital identity, we think, is best solved through this collaborative approach, and it really is about putting the pieces together. So choosing the right standards, ensuring that we have the right policy and governance, which we've talked a bit about, and having technology agnostic approach, because we do see many different technologies in the space, all of which may be capable of solving challenges and helping to push along opportunities. And ultimately people. So when we put all of the pieces of this puzzle together, and no single piece can solve the ecosystem challenge alone, then we will get adoption, then we will get acceleration, and we will increase public confidence and public trust. And so that's what we're working to do in the DIAC and our organization, is to contextualize this space on what are the important issues in putting those pieces together to move this forward in the most respectful and beneficial way for all. Now, this brings us to the concept of a trust framework. And I mentioned earlier that DIAC is a trust framework provider. So a trust framework is basically a set of rules and tools to guide an ecosystem. And so what we see going forward is, and what we see today is an ecosystem that we have data requesters. So, you are in the middle, you need to perform a transaction, and you may be requested to provide data to government or to a bank or to university. So you have many data requesters as you're going through your online transactions. And then you also have data verifiers, and they can be some of the same organizations. They can be governments, they can be banks, universities. And so what's most important is that you are in the center, you have control for how that data is verified and how you can share things like what's your revenue for the year to help you get a loan or get some support through university. What is your address of record officially? What is your date of birth? What's your telephone number? These are all examples of particular data that can be verified by data verifiers in the ecosystem. And the framework really helps to set rules and tools for this ecosystem and how this ecosystem moves forward. A framework provides a bit of a space that we can innovate and use an outcomes-based approach to measure trust across different kinds of solutions. And that's exactly what we have in our Pan-Canadian Trust Framework that's been developed by the public and private sectors in Canada with stakeholders from around the world. It's all freely available to access, of course, in French and in English from our site at diac.ca. But the framework has some core pieces in terms of what does the model for the framework look like? What are the terms that we're using and how do we agree on them? And what's an assessment process around this framework so that we can get that verification of trust? And then we have some specified or normative components of the framework around authentication, notice and consent, verifying a person and verifying an organization. So these are the areas that will be specified for particular outcomes where you can use different technologies and different models to get to that outcome. This is very important as our space moves forward. And most importantly, in each of these components, we have built in privacy as a foundation. So if we don't have data protection and we don't have privacy, we will not have the trust of the community and the citizens who are using the system. Now, we're very pleased to announce that in the beginning of 2022, we will launch the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework Verification Program, Voilà Verifie. This is a program that will accredit information security auditors. We will accredit laboratories, readiness advisors, and they will perform assessments of organizations who want to be Pan-Canadian Trust Framework verified. Those organizations who earn the mark will be added to a trust status list and a registry that details the mark that they earned, the technology that they used, and what risk profile they were assessed against. So this is going to be a very important piece of the puzzle, particularly as we look in Canada at some very important identity-related initiatives, such as a proof of a vaccination or a proof of ability to travel. We see some interesting developments across Canada, across the provinces, and across the economy. And we do believe that when we're working across different technologies and different solutions, having a trust mark that helps us judge what kind of confidence we can have in that solution. That's going to be an important approach to making good decisions about where and how we want to use our identity data, which services we want to interact with. So look for the Voila Verifie program to start accepting applications for information security auditors in the beginning of 2022, and then accepting applications for verification of services or networks a little bit later in 2022 as well. Really good news for Quebec-based entities. We also have a partnership with Prompt, who are supporting cyber resiliency and innovation for Quebec companies, where Quebec-based companies will be able to apply for 50% reimbursement, up to 50% reimbursement of their costs that are associated with going through the Trustmark program. So we're really pleased to partner and work with Prompt to support Quebec-based entities on this road for verification that will help prepare them not only for the Canadian ecosystem, but as they look toward interoperability with other marketplaces and ecosystems, for example, with our largest trading partners in the US, or with our large partners across the pond in the European Union or Asia Pacific as well. So this is all on a road to global digital economy interoperability, ensuring that all Canadians can participate, whether they live in the big cities or the rural remote areas, whether they're in Quebec along with you or British Columbia where I am, everyone should have an opportunity. So I'm really thankful for the time to connect with this audience. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your conference, and it's such a pleasure and honor to be with you today.
Well, Joni, first of all, thanks for the French version of your deck. That was pretty helpful to follow your presentation. I have two questions. First of all, company would be interested to follow up on your Voila Verifie program. Where do they get some more information?
Yes, they can contact us with info@diac.ca, diacc.ca. You can also get in touch with us in LinkedIn or Twitter. We have a lot of different ways, so please just get in touch. We'll set up a meeting, and we also have Quebec-based market leads who will support our Quebec organizations through the program.
Okay. My other question is about, since you have an overview of what's happening throughout the country, which province is doing a better job regarding digital identity? I don't want to put you on the hot spot, but I'm kind of curious.
You put me on the hot spot for sure. No, this is fun. Look, I would say that, certainly there are a lot of eyes on Quebec right now. And I would say that not only from technology perspective, I mean, Quebec is first to act in the proof of vaccination credential, but I would actually really look at the legislative changes that are being made, the Bill 64 and Bill 95, a lot of important leadership that's happening in Quebec. We also see movement in other provinces around Canada. There's certainly commitments being made in Ontario. British Columbia has always been a key player from a digital identity perspective, movement in Alberta. So I think, as always, there are going to be slightly different approaches to how this is done. And certainly Quebec has gained the attention across Canada in the last year in terms of the progress, both on the technology, but I think really more so you should be proud of the policy work that's happening too.
Well, people who are looking to this conference from the government of Quebec are more than happy to hear what you're saying about them. The other question that I have, and it's really difficult not to make any comparison about the two aspects, but since I'm thinking about the COVID apps, we've seen provinces developing their own solution for it, and now we see the federal government arriving in the picture, saying, "Well, now we'll get the federal version of it." Do you see the same thing happening with the an application or a personal identity system being, first of all, kind of being put in place by provinces, and then somebody in Ottawa will say, "Oh, wow, that's a good idea. Maybe we should have our own Canadian system"?
Yeah, look, I would say one of the things that we see from our organization is that we would much prefer that digital identity were solved first, your ability to prove yourself and identify yourself, because if we get this foundational element correct, then it becomes much easier to say, okay, here is a person that's verified and here is a proof of a vaccination that is in the control of that person and that they're sharing, right? So we much prefer that the identity piece was solved first, but this is not where we are, so we work with the reality that we have. I do think that there are going to be individual provincial approaches, as we see already today, and there will be a federal approach. I don't think that Canadians will have, I don't think we should think about it as a single identity of one. I should think that we are the only us. I'm the only me, and I need to have the data in my digital hands that I can show and that I can prove. And so I think that as we move forward, it will be more about data assurance, knowing that we can trust particular pieces of data and data interoperability across different technologies, across different platforms and networks. And this is why I think the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is not defining a specific technology, it's more of an ecosystem framework, will give us signals that we can maybe trust a particular digital wallet, whether it came from a government or whether it's a private sector wallet, or that we can trust a particular piece of information. So I hope that we'll see going forward public sector policy that is very clear and authoritative, that says what our expectations are as citizens and residents regarding how public sector data is made available to us and how we can use it in different technologies and different ecosystems. So I think we should plan for this diversity, design for diversity of technology and solutions, and that's where we're on the road today. And the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework is one tool that can help guide our path to know what we can trust to what level.
So, and that would be my last question. So we can get to this level. What is, according to the survey that you did for the last 2 or 3 years now on this question, what's the biggest challenge that organizations have to solve before we get something, Canadian gets something to use as their digital ID?
Yeah, I think, from an organizational perspective, one of the hardest challenges is the definitions of accountability and liability. So it's less so the technology and more so the policy. So there's certainly work to be done there, both in the public sector and in the private sector. From a public sector perspective, from a people perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is education. And so we in DIAC have been working as what we call digital ID champions. We invite anyone who is a digital ID champion who wants to educate to get in touch with us. But we think there needs to be a massive campaign on how data works and how to make good decisions about data. Because what I see today regarding whether it's a provincial approach or a private sector approach, when I'm out on the internet, I definitely see people do not have an understanding of how this works. There are concerns about tracking and surveillance, when in fact we do live in a surveillance economy today already, so we're trying to improve the current situation. So I think a massive education campaign that meets people where they are and in their culture has to be undertaken.
So we're back to the question of digital literacy.
Yeah, in a sense, yes, and data literacy, yeah.
Well, thanks for that presentation. That was really interesting. Dominic has something for you.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny, for your time. I've got a special card for you. It's not an identity card, but it's a digital thank you for your participation to Cybersecurity 2020. And probably you will see this small piece of card just over there. I just put the digital number of the card.
Ooh la la, merci.
There's a bunch of 0 and 1, so you should get something for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. What a joy.
You're welcome.
This is a wonderful audience. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bientôt.